this video is for those of you who were missing class on Friday, October 18th, whether you were in ag at the fair or you were just absent. So this was the warm-up they started with. And they had to solve for the variable solve for x. And in the first one, we added the three angles together, and it was equal to 180. So we got that x was 16.7. And in the second one, we set the two sides equal because this was an isosceles triangle and both my sides are congruent. So 2x plus 15 equals 5x minus 30, and then I can solve for x. I went around and stamped everyone's homework sheet for trying these 5 problems, and then everyone got in groups and they kind of worked through them to see what they could do together. So number 1 was like a ratio problem where we just change it to 4x, 5x, and 6x. And then when we solve it, we set it equal to 180. All three angles equal 180 degrees. So x was 12. And then that meant that when we plugged it back in, right here, we got that 4 times 12 was 48, 5 times 12 was 60, and 6 times 12 was 72. So these were the angles of the triangle. Number 2 was all about vocabulary. So we went over how in an isosceles triangle like this, it's isosceles, the bottom 2 angles that are congruent are called base angles, and the top angle is called a vertex. And that made this problem a lot easier because we knew vertex angle could be x, and base angles, which are 4 times the vertex, would be 4x. So 4x plus 4x plus x equals 9x. And all of that's equal to 180. So we could solve and say, hey, x is 20. And when we plugged back in, 4x was 80. Number 3, we actually didn't work out. They seemed pretty good on it, but I can still walk you through it. We took angles A, B, and C in this triangle. We said, okay, one of them is 5x plus 35. One of them is 60 minus 3x. And the other is x squared minus 4x plus 70. You add these up because you add 3 angles. And they should equal 180 degrees. You have to combine like terms. So you should end up with x squared plus 2x plus 165 equal to 180, and then you'll subtract 180, and you'll have a quadratic to solve. You should get the x is 5 or negative 3, and the positive answer. Number 4, we had to take some of our vocabulary that we learned the first day on Wednesday and put it to use. So we started by saying, if I look at this triangle without the line, and I know 37 and 32, then I can find that last missing angle. It's 111. One of our vocabulary words were supplementary angles. So we have 111 degrees plus 2x plus 5 should equal 180, because a straight line is always 180 degrees. So even though it's 2 angles split up, it still equals 180 degrees. And then we solved it and got 32 was equal to x. Number 5 was kind of a challenge problem. So on number 5, we first started by looking at the red triangle I have outlined. And we knew that this angle was 90 degrees because it's a right angle. And then we took and said, okay, well, if this one is an isosceles triangle and this base angle is m, the other one must be m. So m plus 90 is 180 degrees. Then we looked at the big blue triangle. We started it the same way. The vertex angle was 50. Since this is isosceles, we called this whole angle x. And we knew this whole angle would be the same. It would be x. So 50 plus x is 180. And we solved that to get that x was 65. Which meant the whole angle was 65 and just m is 45. So we subtracted them to find that this missing part, or n, was 20. Our notes for today were just for midpoint. And we put this in our foldable. So if you turn your foldable to the midpoints and mid-segments, we're just doing midpoint today and we'll do mid-segment next week. The midpoint of a segment is the point that divides it in half, or it's the point in the middle. So if B is the middle of A and C, then this part AB is equal to this part BC. So we did 4 problems with this, and then I did some practice on IXL. The first example was just finding the midpoint of 2 numbers. We talked about how you could go in and say, okay, if I go to 21, I'm also going to 24. I count over to 23, and I'm counting over to 22. So the middle is somewhere in between 22 and 23, which is 22 and a half, which is really just averaging this number. So I can take 20 and 25, average them, or add them, and divide by 2. The second problem starts off by telling us that EF is congruent to FG. That's what these tick marks mean. Just like an isosceles triangle, if 2 things are marked congruent, then they're equal. So 2x equals 50, and then I just divide to find out x is 25. Example 3 is just a little harder, and the words change. So now it tells us n is the midpoint of AB. Even though it doesn't look like it's dividing AB in half, it tells us n is the midpoint. So we know that AN is equal to NB. They're the same. So we set them equal. So we have 2x minus 6 equals x plus 7. Add 6 to both sides, subtract x from both sides. So x is 13. But it didn't ask us to find x. It said find AN. So we had to plug back in, and we said, okay, 2 times 13 is 26, minus 6 is 20. So 20 was my actual answer. And the last problem we did was the hardest type we're going to do with midpoint. And it tells us that AB is 2x plus 5, and that the whole thing, AC, so this whole line segment, is 8x plus 2. What we know from the picture is that AB is congruent to BC. So we just went ahead and said, well, if AB is 2x plus 5 and it's the same as BC, then I'm going to rewrite 2x plus 5 here. And since AB plus BC equals the whole segment, that's the equation we wrote. We did 2x plus 5 plus 2x plus 5, and it equals the whole thing, 8x plus 2. And then we solved, and we got the x plus 2. So that's all the notes we did today. After example 4, if you want some more practice on this, they went to IXL. They didn't do this whole assignment. They actually just did B4. Can't do M1 yet because we haven't learned mid-segments. So if you wanted some more practice on this, you would just log in and do B4 on IXL.